Close your eyes. Let the world you know dissolve into the static of deep time. Imagine standing on a shoreline 180 million years ago. The sand beneath your boots is warm, radiating a heat that feels ancient and heavy. The air is thick, saturated with humidity that clings to your skin, carrying the sharp, chemical scent of resin and wet earth. Behind you, forests of conifers and cycads stretch toward mountains that do not exist on any modern map. Their silhouettes are strange, jagged against a sky that holds no birds, only the leather-winged shadows of early pterosaurs gliding on thermal currents. And in the water before you, something surfaces. A neck breaks the water, long as a telephone pole, topped with a head no larger than a horse's. It belongs to a biological titan. A creature weighing as much as 10 African elephants, yet it moves through the shallows with a fluid, impossible grace. When it turns to fix its gaze upon you, you realize you are witnessing a biology your species will not have words for, until this animal has been dead for eons. This is the Jurassic. It was an epoch that spanned 56 million years of Earth's history, from 201 million years ago to 145 million years ago. To put that scale into perspective, the entirety of human civilization, from the first mud brick cities in Mesopotamia to the device you are holding now, fits into the last 10,000 years. The Jurassic lasted 5,600 times longer than that. It was an age so vast that species arose, conquered continents, and went extinct entirely within it, never knowing the dinosaurs that came before them or the ones that would rise after they were gone. But the Jurassic did not begin with giants. It began with the apocalypse. 201 million years ago, the boundary between the Triassic and Jurassic periods was marked by one of the most violent geological events in planetary history. The supercontinent Pangaea, which had united the world's landmasses for over 100 million years, began to tear itself apart. Deep beneath the crust, the Earth's mantle churned, pushing a massive plume of superheated rock upward. The result was the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, or CAMP, a volcanic event of such magnitude that it defies human comprehension. This wasn't a single volcano erupting. It was the Earth fracturing, vomiting magma across a region the size of a continent, creating flood basalts that would bury millions of square kilometers under molten rock. But the lava was merely the mechanism. The executioner was the atmosphere. These eruptions released approximately 100,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide, 50 times more than humans have released since the Industrial Revolution, but unleashed in a geological blink of an eye. The planet was plunged into a chaotic climate oscillation. First came a volcanic winter, caused by sulfur aerosols blocking the sun, freezing the tropics and shattering food webs. Then, as the sulfur settled, the carbon dioxide took over, triggering a super greenhouse effect that spiked global temperatures by up to 15 degrees Celsius. The oceans acidified, dissolving the calcium carbonate shells of marine life. Mercury, vaporized by the eruptions, poisoned the air and water, leaving a toxic signature in the rock record that we can still read today. In this chemical hellscape, 76% of all species on Earth simply ceased to exist. The dominant rulers of the Triassic, the Pseudosuchians, massive crocodile-line archosaurs that had suppressed the early dinosaurs, were wiped out. When the smoke cleared and the climate stabilized, the world was empty. The ecological stage had been swept clean. Into this silence stepped the survivors, the dinosaurs. They had been marginal creatures in the Triassic, small and opportunistic, living in the shadows of the Pseudosuchians. But the extinction event had spared them, perhaps due to their small size, their warm-blooded metabolism, or their ability to burrow. Now they looked out upon a world that was theirs for the taking. What followed in the early and middle Jurassic was one of the most spectacular evolutionary experiments in history, the biological engineering of the sauropods. It forces us to ask a question that touches the very limits of biology. How does an animal grow to weigh 70 tons on land? How does an organism defy the crushing, relentless logic of gravity? The sauropods, creatures like Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, and Apatosaurus, are the answer. They were not merely big, they were biomechanical marvels that solved engineering problems nature had never faced before. The secret to their gigantism lies in a suite of adaptations that no modern land mammal possesses. It starts with the breath. Sauropods inherited a respiratory system from their ancestors that is far superior to our own. Like modern birds, they possessed a system of unidirectional airflow. While mammals breathe in and out, mixing fresh oxygen with stale exhaust in the lungs, sauropods utilized a series of air sacs that extended throughout their body cavities and even into their bones. This allowed for a constant stream of oxygenated air to pass over the lung tissue, extracting energy with ruthless efficiency. This system did more than just fuel their metabolism. It lightened the load. The bones of a sauropod were not solid pillars of calcium. They were pneumatic, filled with air pockets and honeycombed structures derived from those respiratory air sacs. A vertebra the size of a kitchen chair might weigh half as much as a solid bone of the same dimensions. This avian-style skeletal structure meant that a 50-ton animal wasn't carrying a 50-ton skeleton. They were giants built of air and bone, lighter than they appeared, yet structurally sound enough to support their immense bulk. Then, there was the neck. In the evolutionary arms race for energy, the long neck was the ultimate weapon. It allowed these titans to stand in one place and strip vegetation from a vast area, reaching high into the canopy where no other herbivore could compete. This is the principle of energy efficiency, maximum calorie intake for minimum movement. But to support such a cantilevered structure, the head had to be small. A massive head with heavy chewing muscles like that of a T-Rex or a modern elephant would have been impossible to support at the end of a 10-meter lever arm. So, the sauropods abandoned chewing. They evolved simple peg-like teeth designed only to strip leaves from branches. They swallowed vegetation whole, letting their massive fermentation vat stomachs do the work of breaking down the tough plant matter. By outsourcing digestion to their gut bacteria and removing the need for heavy dental machinery, they could maintain a lightweight skull, allowing the neck to grow longer, reaching higher, fueling the body that grew ever larger. They grew with terrifying speed. A sauropod hatchling emerging from an egg no bigger than a soccer ball would have to increase its body mass by 10,000 times to reach adulthood. To survive, they grew as fast as biologically possible, fueled by the rich gymnosperm forests of the Jurassic, a world before flowers, dominated by high-calorie conifers and ferns. By the Middle Jurassic, the sauropods had become the undisputed masters of the continents. They were the largest terrestrial animals ever to walk the Earth, shaking the ground with footsteps that registered on the Richter scale of the ancient world. They were living fortresses, their sheer size rendering adults immune to predation. They were the triumph of the post-apocalyptic world, the proof that catastrophe is merely the prelude to a new order. But a world of giants requires a balance. As the herbivores grew into titans, the predators that hunted them were forced to adapt, initiating an evolutionary arms race that would produce the most terrifying carnivores the world had ever seen. The age of the peaceful giant was ending. The age of the hunter was about to begin. Abundance inevitably invites destruction. In the biological calculus of the Jurassic, the presence of millions of tons of sauropod meat moving across the landscape represented an energetic resource too vast to ignore. Nature abhors a vacuum, but it abhors wasted energy even more. And so, as the herbivores grew into titans, the shadow of the predator lengthened to match them. The Middle and Late Jurassic became the stage for an evolutionary arms race, a brutal contest of adaptation and counter-adaptation that would forge the most efficient killing machines the planet had yet seen. Enter the theropods. These were the bipedal carnivores, the lineage that would eventually produce the Tyrannosaurus and the modern hawk. But in the Jurassic, they were perfecting the art of the hunt. The undisputed lord of this era, particularly in the rich floodplains of North America's Morrison Formation, was Allosaurus fragilis. An adult Allosaurus was not the largest predator to ever walk the earth. That distinction belongs to later Cretaceous giants. But it was a masterpiece of lethal engineering. Measuring nearly 30 feet in length and weighing over 2 tons, it was the wolf of the Jurassic. Its anatomy suggests a terrifying hunting style. Unlike the bone-crushing jaws of a T-Rex, the skull of an Allosaurus was surprisingly lightweight, built with loose articulations that allowed it to expand, absorbing the shock of impact. Its teeth were not thick spikes, but serrated blades, backward-curving steak knives designed to slice through flesh and cause catastrophic blood loss. Biomechanics researchers have proposed the hatchet jaw hypothesis to explain how this animal killed. The theory suggests that Allosaurus could open its jaws to a grotesque 90-degree angle. It would then drive its upper jaw downward like a hatchet, using the massive muscles of its neck to deliver a hacking strike that drove the serrated teeth deep into the prey, followed by a backward pull to tear out massive chunks of meat. It was a predator designed not to crush, but to bleed its victims to death. Imagine the terror of a juvenile sauropod separated from the herd. The ground trembles, not with the rhythmic thud of its kin, but with the rapid, agile approach of a 2-ton bioweapon. The attack is not a single bite, but a flurry of slashing strikes, leaving wounds that weaken the giant until it collapses from shock and exsanguination. This was the reality of the Jurassic food web, a constant, violent friction between the eaters of plants and the eaters of flesh. But evolution does not leave the prey defenseless. As predators refined their weaponry, herbivores evolved into fortresses. The Stegosaurus asterisk stands as the iconic symbol of this resistance. It is an animal so bizarre that early paleontologists struggled to understand its geometry. A small, narrow head housing a brain the size of a bent hot dog led to a massive barrel-shaped body adorned with 2 rows of kite-shaped plates rising from its back. For decades, scientists debated the function of these plates. Were they armor? Unlikely. They were too brittle and filled with blood vessels. Were they solar panels for thermoregulation, helping a cold-blooded giant warm up in the morning sun? Plausible. But today, many suspect they were billboards, elaborate display structures used to signal dominance, attract mates, or intimidate rivals, flushing with blood to turn vivid red in a display of biological vanity. However, the business end of the Stegosaurus was the tail. At the tip sat 4 massive spikes, each up to 3 feet long, composed of bone and sheathed in razor-sharp keratin. Paleontologists call this the thagomizer, a whimsical term that has become scientific canon. But there is nothing whimsical about its function. We have found fossil evidence of its use. An Allosaurus vertebra with a puncture wound that perfectly matches the geometry of a Stegosaurus spike. The bone had begun to heal, meaning the predator survived the encounter, likely in agonizing pain. It is a frozen moment of violence from 150 million years ago, proof that in the Jurassic even the apex predators had to fear the prey. Not all defense was physical. Some dinosaurs, like the ornithopods, creatures such as Camptosaurus, and Dryosaurus, chose a different strategy: speed and vigilance. These were the antelopes of the Mesozoic, medium-sized herbivores that relied on social cohesion. They processed food more efficiently than the sauropods, using beak-like mouths to crop vegetation and cheeks to hold it while they chewed, an innovation that allowed them to extract more energy from the tough Jurassic flora. They survived by being the eyes and ears of the ecosystem, a nervous system of the herds that would scatter at the first sign of an Allosaurus, leaving the slower armored giants to hold the line. To understand these animals, you must also understand their world. If you walked through a late Jurassic forest, the silence would strike you first. There were no flowers, no bursts of color, no sweet scents of nectar. The angiosperms, the flowering plants that define our modern conception of nature, had not yet evolved. This was a gymnosperm world, a realm of greens and browns, dominated by conifers, ferns, ginkgos, and cycads. There were no bees buzzing, no butterflies fluttering. The soundscape was different, filled with the mechanical rasp of insects feeding on pine needles and the guttural calls of reptiles. And in the undergrowth of this alien forest, beneath the feet of the fighting giants, a different kind of revolution was taking place. It was happening in the dark, in the mud, as in the spaces too small for the dinosaurs to notice. The mammals were there. They are the unsung heroes of the Jurassic, our direct ancestors, living in a world that belonged to monsters. They were small, rarely larger than a squirrel or a house cat. Creatures like Frutafossor and Morganucodon*. To survive in the age of dinosaurs, mammals were forced into a specific high-stakes niche, the night shift. While the dinosaurs, predominantly visual hunters, ruled the day, the mammals conquered the darkness. This forced evolution drove a massive upgrade in sensory biology. To navigate the night, early mammals developed acute hearing. Over millions of years, bones from the reptilian jaw migrated to the ear, becoming the malleus, incus, and stapes, the 3 delicate bones that allow you to hear the nuance of a whisper or a symphony. They developed complex whiskers to feel their way through burrows, and a sense of smell so sophisticated it mapped the chemical world in high definition. But this nocturnal lifestyle came with a heavy price. To be active at night, when the ambient temperature dropped, mammals had to generate their own internal heat. They became endothermic, warm-blooded. This required a furious metabolism. A Jurassic mammal could not afford to rest. It had to eat constantly, insects, grubs, roots, just to keep its internal furnace burning. They were furry, high-energy engines of survival, scurrying through the leaf litter, stealing eggs, and hunting the insects that fed on the dinosaur waste. They were small, yes, but do not mistake smallness for weakness. In the grand evolutionary wager, size is a double-edged sword. The giants require vast resources. They are vulnerable to starvation, to climate shifts, to the collapse of food webs. The small can hide. The small can survive on scraps. The small can burrow to escape the fire and the frost. In the Jurassic, the mammals were honing the traits that would one day allow them to inherit the Earth: intelligence, adaptability, parental care, and thermal independence. They were the underdogs waiting in the wings of history. As the Jurassic progressed, the continents continued their slow tectonic dance. The Atlantic Ocean widened, pushing the Americas away from Africa and Europe. The isolation of these landmasses began to create distinct biological provinces. In North America, the Morrison Formation preserved the drama of Allosaurus and Stegosaurus. In Africa, the Tendaguru beds preserved the towering asterisk Giraffatitan asterisk. In Europe, the archipelago of islands that would become Germany was preserving something else entirely. A delicate, feathered clue that the dinosaurs were not just conquering the land, but were preparing to leave it altogether. The land was full. The arms race between predator and prey had reached a stalemate of heavy armor and hatchet jaws. But life is expansionist. It seeks new frontiers. And as the Jurassic reached its zenith, the reptiles looked toward the two realms they had not yet fully claimed: the crushing depths of the blue ocean and the infinite expanse of the sky. The conquest of the Earth was about to go vertical. The conquest of the Earth was not limited to the ground beneath the dinosaurs' feet. While the sauropods shook the continents and the theropods stalked the forests, a parallel invasion was taking place in the vast, blue wilderness that surrounded them. The oceans of the Jurassic were not merely habitats. They were battlegrounds where terrestrial ancestors had returned to the water, shedding their legs for flippers and their lungs for the ability to hold breath against the crushing dark. The transition from land to sea is one of the most radical shifts an evolutionary lineage can undertake. It requires the complete reorganization of biology. Gravity, the constant oppressor on land, is replaced by buoyancy. Air, freely available, becomes a precious resource that must be sipped at the surface. And in the Jurassic seas, 3 great dynasties of marine reptiles rose to solve these problems, each with a terrifying elegance. First, the ichthyosaurs. These were the speed demons of the Mesozoic, living torpedoes that had converged on the body plan of the modern dolphin and tuna. They were built for high-velocity pursuit, with vertical tail flukes and streamlined bodies that cut through the water with minimal drag. But look closely at their skull. In species like Ophthalmosaurus asterisk, the eyes were enormous. Dinner plates of bone and soft tissue designed to capture the faintest glimmers of light in the deep ocean. This tells us they were diving deep, plunging into the twilight zone to hunt squid and fish in the crushing darkness, guided by vision where other senses failed. Then, the plesiosaurs. If the ichthyosaurs were built for speed, the plesiosaurs were built for stealth and maneuverability. With 4 wing-like flippers, they flew through the water much like sea turtles do today, using a refined underwater flight stroke. But their defining feature was the neck, sometimes stretching half the length of their body. This was not an accident of evolution. It was a sniper's rifle. The long neck allowed the head to strike into schools of fish before the main body of the predator was even detected. A stealth adaptation perfect for the murky, nutrient-rich waters of the coastal Jurassic. And finally, the pliosaurs. These were the apex predators, the monsters that haunted the nightmares of everything else in the ocean. Creatures like Liopleurodon asterisk abandoned the long neck for a massive crushing skull filled with teeth the size of cucumbers. They were the T-Rexes of the deep, capable of biting a smaller marine reptile in half. In the Jurassic Ocean, there was no safety. From the sunlit surface to the abyssal plains, the water was patrolled by reptiles that had conquered the aquatic realm as thoroughly as the dinosaurs had conquered the land. But the most profound revolution was happening overhead. For hundreds of millions of years, the sky had belonged to the insects. Then, in the Triassic, the pterosaurs had taken to the air, stretching skin over elongated fingers to create living kites. By the Jurassic, they were masters of the aerial realm. Rhamphorhynchus skimmed the lagoons of Europe, snatching fish with needle-like teeth. Pterodactylus fluttered through the coastal forests. They were diverse, capable, and undisputed rulers of the heavens. Until something changed. In the limestone quarries of Solnhofen, Germany, preserved in rock so fine it was used for lithographic printing, we found a fossil that broke the boundary between reptile and bird. Archaeopteryx *. It had the teeth of a dinosaur, the long bony tail of a reptile, and the claws of a predator. But it also had feathers. Not just simple fuzz, but complex asymmetrical flight feathers identical to those of a modern raven. This was the moment the dinosaur lineage unlocked the sky. It wasn't a sudden leap, but a gradual tinkering. Feathers, originally evolved for insulation or display, were co-opted for aerodynamics. Arms that once grasped prey became wings that grasped the air. Archaeopteryx * was not a master flyer. It likely fluttered and glided, a clumsy pioneer compared to a modern eagle. But it was the beginning. It was the proof that the dinosaurs were not evolutionary dead ends destined for extinction. They were innovators. And while the non-avian dinosaurs would eventually perish, this lineage, the birds, would survive, carrying the legacy of the Jurassic into the modern world. As the Jurassic drew to a close, around 145 million years ago, the world began to shift again. The transition to the Cretaceous period wasn't marked by a single catastrophic explosion like the one that started the Jurassic, but by a slow, inexorable biological turnover. The great Stegosaurus lineages began to fade, replaced by the tank-like ankylosaurs. The specific families of sauropods and theropods cycled out, replaced by new, more specialized forms. But the most significant change was botanical. The green, flowerless world of the Jurassic was about to be invaded by color. The angiosperms, the flowering plants, were evolving. They would bring with them a revolution in energy, creating fruits, nuts, and nectar, driving the evolution of new insects, new birds, and new dinosaurs to eat them. The monochrome forests were preparing to bloom, changing the energy dynamics of the planet forever. We look back at the Jurassic now through the windows left to us by geology. The Morrison Formation in North America, a graveyard of giants where Allosaurus bones lie tangled with Apatosaurus ribs. The Solnhofen limestone in Germany, a quiet lagoon that captured the delicate feathers of the first birds. The Tendaguru beds in Tanzania, proving that the reign of the sauropods was a global phenomenon. These are not just rocks, they are time capsules. They are the only evidence we have of a world that lasted for 56 million years. A world where the Earth was warmer, the oceans were higher, and life was pushed to its absolute limits. It is easy to think of the dinosaurs as failures because they are gone. We use the word dinosaur to mean something obsolete, lumbering, unable to adapt. But this is a lie of our own making. The Jurassic proves that they were the ultimate success story. They survived the apocalypse of the Triassic. They engineered bodies that defied physics. They conquered every continent, every ocean, and eventually, the sky itself. They ruled for over 160 million years. We have been here for 300,000. We are a blink of an eye. They were the eternity. So the next time you see a sparrow hopping on the pavement or a hawk circling high on a thermal, do not look at it as just a bird. Look at it and see the ghost of a velociraptor. See the legacy of Archaeopteryx *, and see the endurance of a lineage that began in the shadow of the Triassic extinction, rose to dominate the Jurassic, and refused to die even when an asteroid set the world on fire. The Jurassic is over. The giants are stone, but the engine of life that drove them, the relentless, adaptive, beautiful force of evolution, is still running. The world you walk on is built on their bones. The air you breathe was shaped by their forests, and the story of life on Earth in all its terrifying grandeur is a story that they wrote. Sleep well, time traveler. The age of giants has passed, but the dream of the Jurassic remains. Good night.